Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam here on RJTV, channel 224 on Sky Broadcasting, going on all around the country. Also on DZRJ Radio, DZRJ Facebook, and YouTube, and TikTok. My name is Eric Lecain. Today we'll be talking about some fascinating, interesting stories from outside the Philippines, stuff going on around the world that you really need to know about, maybe. So let's just go ahead and dive in. The Queen is dead. Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning leader of the English monarchy, died on Thursday very peacefully at her Scottish estate. She sat on the throne for 70 years, starting in 1952. She was the caretaker of what was once one of the most ruthless empires in history of mankind. However, she was not of that time. She was of a different time, the post-war era, after the world had defeated Nazism and England was no longer a conquering empire, but rather a commonwealth, just overseeing countries but not ruling over them. Many people didn't realize it, but the Queen of England was also the Queen of Australia, the Queen of Canada, of New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Jamaica, among others. Her reign spanned over 15 English prime ministers, the first being Winston Churchill, born in 1874, and the latest, Liz Truss, who was born 101 years later. Queen Elizabeth was not like the rulers of English history, the ones that we studied in history class. She had the aura of being kind and even-handed, unlike some of the previous rulers, such as King Edward II, whose life was recently immortalized in a really good Netflix movie called Outlaw King. He ruled for 20 years, but is best known for his humiliating defeat by Robert the Bruce of Scotland. Later, Edward took up with a young man, left the Queen, who later came back and defeated him in battle, putting her son on the throne. Supposedly, Edward was executed by putting a red-hot poker up his behind. And of course, Mary Queen of Scots, who ruled for 25 years in Scotland, who was known for plotting the murder of many, including her own husband. She plotted several times to kill Queen Elizabeth I, but was caught in the plot and was beheaded with an axe. Edward VIII, whose reign as king was about 11 months only, he loved the ladies, especially the married ones. He fell in love with a married American and decided to marry her, which broke every rule. So England was like, okay, enough of this guy. But of course, then there was Henry VIII, best known for beheading his wives, which he grew tired of. He also is best known for splitting up the Catholic Church and starting his own church, which later became known as the Church of England. He was famous for beheading anyone who didn't like him, and he loved to pillage his own country. But these leaders, none of them lasted very long, nor were they loved as much as Queen Elizabeth II. During her 70-year rule, she was never unpopular or hated, as were the previous rulers, even though the monarchy in general, with its many scandals, has been not so very popular lately. She has remained in the good graces of the people of England. This we saw at the UK recently when they celebrated the Platinum Jubilee, the 70th anniversary of her ascension to the throne, in which everyone in the country seemed to unite all at once, even with the issues surrounding them at the time with the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The death of the Queen actually seemed quite sudden, as she was seen on Tuesday formally appointing Liz Truss, the replacement for Boris J., and the UK's newest prime minister. This was a photo taking of them. Queen was smiling, doing business as usual. However, on Wednesday, the Queen seemed to be having some problems and had to cancel a virtual meeting with the British Council by late Wednesday evening. They knew something was very wrong. The children were all called and they all came to the house. Then on Thursday, with her family around her, the Queen passed away. U.S. President Joe Biden said the Queen was a steady presence She was more than a monarchy. She defined an era. Of course, many heads of state spoke out about her passing, including other kings around the world: King of Spain, King of Jordan, the Queen of Norway. She was just one of those leaders that everyone admired. But now what? Now that the Queen is dead, what happens to the monarchy? I mean, many have said that once the Queen dies, the monarchy should die with her. That England no longer needs a queen or a king. And with all the scandals surrounding the royal family, many have compared them to a bunch of spoiled fools who just live off the taxes of the people. However, currently, tradition will prevail and Charles will ascend to the level of king. So for now, Prince Charles is now King Charles III. Now, according to the rules, he is the eldest child, so he will sit on the throne while his son William will be the prince and will be next in line. Now, throughout history, it used to be the rule that the throne always went to only boys in the family and only to a girl if there were no boys. And also, if the king or queen married a Catholic, then they would be disqualified. However, as of 2011, all those old school rules have been changed. The only old rule still around is that the king or queen themselves cannot be Catholic. Only a Protestant can rule England. But the question is it still prudent to even have a royal family in these modern times? Well, some say yes, and some say they're a big waste of money. The only one thing about having a royal family is that they symbolize the heads of state and the traditions of England. They no longer do much in the way of politics. They will approve someone to run the country. And if the prime minister then turns out to be no good, they can swap them out, a.k.a. Boris Johnson. Also, having a monarchy allows the country to not be a divided government, a.k.a. the United States. Also, since a royal no longer really runs the country, they usually fall in the middle ground of political sides, and they are not usually corrupt because it's not in their interest to be corrupt because they are the country. It's like stealing from your own bank account when you own the bank. Also, unlike places like the U.S., you don't have to deal with a transfer of power every 4 to 8 years. You can't really vote a queen out of office. However, things like diversity in government are out the window. You're never going to see a lot of black people in the top positions in England. It's pretty much a whites only. And with royal family comes class structure in society. There'll always be commoners and peasants based on the family you were born in. Also, if a royal family member becomes publicly unpopular, that can be a problem. Remember Charles's first wife, Diane. She was one of the most popular royals in history until her death. Charles was very unpopular after she passed. Will always carry that stigma of leaving her for another woman, and then all the unanswered questions about Diane's death. But as of now, it looks like the royal family has been working on its own PR, getting around the issues between the brother and Jeffrey Epstein and the exit of Prince Harry from the family. But everything seems to be, well, somewhat okay now. Charles has spent his entire life waiting for the moment to be king, and now it has finally come at the age of 70. So let's see how he handles being king and how much longer England feels the need for the royals. And we will see which of them will be immortalized in one of those cool upcoming Netflix movies. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. Let's do a quick update on the news coming out of the U.S. The latest Trump scandal took another interesting turn this week. Remember, over the past few weeks, the FBI raided Trump's home looking for classified documents he took from the White House but wasn't supposed to take. Last we discussed on how there may or may not be more documents still there because there were folders found with the word classified stamped on them, and they were empty. So currently there might be issues of where those might have ended up. Some documents were found mixed in with his clothes and some personal items. But one of the big items this week is that we found out that one of the documents had nuclear secrets from another country. They found a set of documents that the U.S. intelligence had collected that had information about the defense systems of a foreign entity, including their nuclear capabilities. This is what you might call some of the most sensitive information the U.S. keeps in its classified library and is extremely valuable. This was one of the documents the DOJ had asked for, which Trump's lawyer said he no longer had. This had the classification of top secret, not just classified or secret, but super secret, confidentially classified. Why would Trump want to keep such a document? I mean, of course, it would be worth a very, very large amount of money. But would it be worth selling a U.S. top secret document? The weird thing was that Trump picked out the documents that he returned to the DOJ back in January, but purposely kept this one. There's many speculations as to what country it might be, especially if it was Iran. That could be extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. I mean, what if the Saudis got a hold of that? Could change the balance of power. Now, I'm not saying that that's what country it is, but I don't know, it would make sense, wouldn't it? Right now, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has very close ties with the Saudi and is currently doing business with the royal family there. I'm just saying. Now, Trump has already come out with a statement saying the whole nuclear documents thing is a big hoax. However, they found the documents in his residence, so I'm not exactly sure how it's a hoax. But in any case, last week, Trump had requested a third party to check all the documents seized from his home to see which ones might have attorney privilege or executive privilege, which is kind of weird because, he's not the president. The documents they took belong to the U.S. government, so I'm not sure how any of them would fall under attorney privilege, but his guys took it before a judge. Now, many people speculated that this would go nowhere because the DOJ already went through the documents and determined what was and was not privileged. However, the judge surprised many people with a very bizarre ruling, which didn't seem to follow the rules at all. She said that there could be a third party assigned to look at the documents and that the Justice Department could no longer use the documents in any way to further their investigation. What? Now, just in case you were wondering, the judge that decided the ruling was appointed to the bench by Donald Trump just before he left office. I mean, need I say conflict of interest? Anyway, so far, everyone is blasting this ruling. The New York Times front page said deeply problematic. Experts questioned judges' intervention into the Trump inquiry. Law professors out there in Duke University said this ruling is laughably bad, and the written jurisdiction for it is even flimsier. Words like it's untethered from reality. Now, Trump is known for trying to put judges on the federal benches that are loyal to him rather than the law. He has actually said that these are my judges, calling them his judges. This was Trump's idea when he tried to overthrow the election using his judges, but unfortunately, they refused to judge in his favor because, couldn't produce any evidence. There's only so much a judge can do. So it was very hard for the judges to rule in his favor during the elections. He really thought his picks to the Supreme Court were going to just go ahead and hand the presidency back over to him. But again, that didn't happen. During that time, one of Trump's own lawyers was actually in contact with the wife of one of the justices on the Supreme Court. And if they could have gotten the vice president to go along with that scheme, they thought that the Trump judges on the Supreme Court would have had a good reason to make him president again. But that, of course, did not work. But now this judge that made this ruling, as I have said, this judge was appointed after Trump had already lost the election. She seems to be kind of just, playing along. Now, interesting background story about her. Trump had filed one of those ludicrous lawsuits after he was out of office against Hillary Clinton. And then he went to file it and filed it in her courthouse, which drew attention for a long list of reasons. However, he ended up with a different judge. That judge even made a comment in his ruling after he threw the whole thing out of court, saying it was kind of odd that he picked the court where the only reason would be the fact that there's a judge here that he appointed. Anyway, Trump tried to do the same thing again, except this time he got the judge he wanted. Same judge he tried to get before. In the beginning, she was like, why are you even here? Because this is being litigated somewhere else. In fact, there's only been one judge overseeing this whole thing, so why bring it to another court with another judge? But after the song and dance, she decided to give this incredibly bizarre ruling, which has said that a special master should be found to review the documents for possible privilege, which still makes no sense to me, or anyone else for that matter, because these documents are not between Trump and his lawyer. They are the property of the U.S. government. Bringing another person to see if there's any personal documents in the pile would just cause multiple delays. Of course, the DOJ would not take any personal documents because why would they? It would slow the case down. They would have to treat the whole thing differently. And besides, how does Trump even get to say who gets to review these classified documents because they are not his? They are the property of the U.S. government. Also, I don't understand what the argument is about executive privilege. The DOJ is the executive branch. They are the ones that have the privilege. Trump was not the president when he took these documents, so there's no executive privilege, right? Anyway, all sounds kind of insane, but not just to me, but to everyone, even the guys on Fox, including the Justice Department, who is obviously going to appeal this. The interesting thing about all the developments this week are the facts that Trump appointed a judge to a federal circuit bench and then went directly to that judge to get a ruling that he knew he couldn't get anywhere else. Then the judge gave Trump his favorite ruling, and that many are now calling ridiculous, and was obviously and now going to get appealed. This is what we were talking about last year, all these judges that Trump was appointing. Why was he doing this? Well, I guess now we know. So anyway, now the DOJ and Trump's lawyers must agree on a special master to look over the documents. How long will that take? Can you say never? They are never going to agree. So, after several months of not agreeing, they will go back to the judge eventually. In the meantime, Trump's judge ruled that the FBI has to stop the investigation, which means they can't investigate what happened to those documents in those empty folders. Where could they be? Did Trump remove them from the folders to give them to someone, or did someone else remove them? Someone who was in Trump's country club? All you got to do is just pay a fee and you can be a member of that club. Now, as of today, with all the incredible backlash from the legal world, the judge has done a little bit of backpedaling. She is now saying that the DOJ can still use some of the documents or the empty folders in their investigation. In any case, foreign countries now know the U.S. president was able to remove documents from the White House, and one of them is about them. Who's ever going to trust the U.S. again with a secret? Like I said before, the issue may not be the info itself, but how the U.S. was able to get it. So what's next in this saga? Who knows what will happen now? Currently, the ex-president is under investigation for a multitude of things, including trying to get the election officials votes thrown out in Georgia, tax fraud in New York, in which his own CFO was convicted and sentenced to prison, his involvement in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and he's being sued by his own niece. Just this week in New York, his right-hand man, Steve Bannon, was led away in handcuffs for fraud and a donor scheme. And also, Trump himself this week is being investigated for getting his followers to donate $250 million to try and stop the stealing of the election from him. But in the end, he didn't use the money for that. He just kept it. You couldn't script this any better for a movie. Every time I think they got him some way, somehow, the ex-president always finds a way to slither out from under the cases that would put the rest of us in jail for life. For all of you that thought that just because Trump was voted out of office, we wouldn't hear from him again, well, you would be wrong. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. We talk about many places around the world here on the show, but one place we don't hear much about is Pakistan. Now, usually when Pakistan does come up in the conversation, it's about something to do with a terrorist leader being killed or being hunted. Pakistan and Afghanistan are the go-to places to hide out if you are a top terrorist. But lately, that's not the big issue in Pakistan. It's rain. It's raining really hard in Pakistan. I mean, really, really, really hard. So much rain that Pakistan is currently in what many call a biblical flood. Nearly 1/3 of the country is underwater. The rainfall is somewhere around 784% more rain than they normally get. This comes as Pakistan just dealt with back-to-back heat waves in June and July, setting records all over the country. The main reason for so much rain is that the surface of the Indian Ocean has become very hot at an alarming rate. This rise in temperature is being blamed for the huge jump in monsoon rainfall. So far, 1,396 people have died due to the massive flooding, and that includes 499 children, and millions have been displaced. The biggest problem is that there's nowhere for the water to recede. They want to pump it out, but where? Most of the dry land is underwater. They estimate 570,000 homes were destroyed, while over 1 million are damaged. Meanwhile, the agricultural fields have been devastated. 750,000 livestock animals have been killed. Roads, bridges, around 17,500 schools have been either damaged or destroyed. And with this type of disaster in this type of country, it's the aftermath that becomes tricky to deal with. Clean drinking water is already a problem. And with sitting water, they will become cholera, dengue, malaria. There's already expecting big problems with waterborne diseases. Also, of the 32 million people displaced, 650,000 of them are women who are pregnant. More than 70,000 of them are due to deliver this month. This is something that needs to be worked out very soon. Malnutrition for a pregnant woman can be dangerous on so many levels. And of course, there have to be babies when the hospitals, how can they deliver the babies when the hospitals are being completely overrun now? So in the meantime, what are they doing? They're giving out birthing kits to help women get through the process. But of course, one of the big problems is the birthing of billions of mosquitoes. This is really going to be a problem down the road because there is no way of knowing how long the new floodwaters will stay. In fact, there's a giant lake that just appeared on a big piece of land there. And like I said, there's no place to pump the water for now. Currently, Pakistan has put the number at $30 billion in losses because of the rain. The United States and the UAE have already started arriving with plane loads of aid to try and help the country. But this is going to take a lot more than a few plane loads. This is going to take a long time to fix this. Now, experts have already come out with proof that this crazy rain is caused by global warming. However, the most ironic thing is that Pakistan really produces very little carbon emissions, somewhere around 1% of the total global emissions. But this is the thing. The larger countries that do send the majority of carbon into the air are not as affected because of their location. The UN General Secretary made a statement that the world owes impoverished Pakistan massive help in recovering from the floods because the country bears less blame than many others for this climate crisis. Pakistan has not contributed in a meaningful way to the climate change. The level of emissions in this country is relatively low, but Pakistan is one of the most dramatically impacted countries by climate change. He goes on, we are heading into a disaster. We have waged war on nature, and nature is striking back in a devastating way. Even today, emissions are rising as people die in floods and famine. This is insanity. This is a collective suicide. From Pakistan, which is where he is now, I am issuing a global appeal. Stop this madness. End the war with nature. Invest in renewable energy now. So, according to this UN General Secretary, this is one of the major disasters that can explicably be tied to global warming. It's like a perfect situation to create an enormous monsoon. The water on the surface of the ocean continues to heat as the water is sucked into the atmosphere, and they also have very similar issues to kind of what we have here in Manila, that there have been either bad or no planning to deal with floods. Pakistan's government has allowed hotels to be built right there on the edge of the rivers. They allowed for illegal and unregulated housing areas to be erected in flood-prone areas. Now, of course, no one could have predicted a storm like this. However, they knew these storms in Pakistan had been getting more and more intense every year. It's just this one jumped up a few notches. Crazy amounts of rain it had. As experts are assessing the damage, a lot of it was caused due to structures that, well, never should have been there in the first place. Now, the problem is, what's next? Now that we know what scientists have been telling us is real, that it's not going to get better. In fact, it's probably going to get worse. Is the world going to think as a collective unit in order to deal with a problem that we as a collective world created? You know, right now in California, they are basically living in a microwave oven. The Sacramento, on Tuesday last week, I believe, they recorded a temperature of 47 degrees Celsius. In Reno, it's 41. Salt Lake City, it was 42. This is the new reality in the world now, and it's a heat wave. Have you noticed that heat waves are getting bigger, longer, and are extending across larger sections of countries? Some scientists are saying that by 2050, these bizarre heat waves will no longer be bizarre. They will be the normal. Frequency will increase. Duration will increase. The intensity of these things will increase. California is currently in the worst heat wave in history. Wait, didn't we just say the same thing about China last week? These extreme temperatures have also brought drought on the West Coast. And something else that we didn't expect, a hurricane. This hurricane could create even more power outages than are already there. And this intense wind could fan the flames of already out of control forest fires. Anyway, Hurricane K is making its way to California right now. It's the first hurricane they've had there in more than 20 years. This is as Los Angeles is already feeling temperatures upwards of 40 degrees every day. The hurricane is expected to bring 60-mile-an-hour winds as it will move across the Fairview fire that has already burned up 19,000 acres. But with the heavy rains could also come flash flooding. And here's something interesting. It's a term that I had never heard before. The massive heat wave extends from Canada all the way down to northern Mexico, and it has put the area under a very high pressure. This high pressure has thus created a kind of clear lid over the region This lid causes the hot air to sink as it becomes warmer because of the sun rays going through the lid. This is known as a heat dome. The climate crisis has caused this heat dome to become much larger than it should have been, and it's trapped all the heat. And there will be more and more fires because of it. The drought, the heat, the wind. It's a perfect scenario for massive fires in California. So far this year, 245,000 acres have burned in 6,100 different wildfires in California. Like I said, it will get far worse before it gets better. And this leads us to the main story here. When I first read this story, I thought, well, this can't be true. But the more I investigated it, the more true it became. It has to do with that discussion that we had several months ago about what was happening in Antarctica. This has to do with one of the most important glaciers in the Arctic. It's the Thwaites Glacier. However, it's been recently renamed to the Doomsday Glacier. Now, why call it that? I mean, it seems a little dramatic, doesn't it? Until, of course, you really take a hard look at what's going on up there. This massive glacier is holding on by its frozen fingernails. The problem, this glacier is about the size of the state of Florida, and it's melting a lot faster than scientists had first thought. Over the past decade, cracks have been forming, making giant open fractures into the ice. This has weakened the ice shelf because much of the ice is actually melting from within. The ice shelf is retreating due to all these changes in heat in the Arctic. This ice shelf is quickly changing its form, especially when you go down into the ocean about a half a mile. This is where things are disintegrating. This is part of where the ice is destabilizing, and when it could start a chain reaction into other neighboring ice shelves. This is where they would all begin to weaken one day, and eventually there could be a widespread collapse. When this happens, the ocean will rise immediately 10 feet. So when this happens, we will most likely need to redraw the maps of the world. Miles of coastline would simply disappear. Some of the largest cities in the world, such as New York, Miami, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, would just disappear. Scientists are not talking anymore about will this happen, but rather when this will happen. There's really nothing man can do to stop the ice from melting, and the world is not going to stop using fossil fuels tomorrow. In fact, it's probably not going to stop for a while. Even with the Doomsday Glacier ready to fall into the sea, many still don't see it as a problem. So if you currently are living in one of those multi-million-dollar Miami condos right off the ocean, maybe it's a good time to get an electric car, or maybe move, because it's not that far off when the tide is going to roll in and never roll out. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. Pine nuts. Nothing like a good Chinese pine nut. But how do you get them? Well, you climb a tree with spiked shoes, sometimes 50 to 60 feet in the air, possibly fall, break your neck. Or you could use a hydrogen balloon. Yeah, these days, a lot of Chinese pickers will tie a balloon with a rope to the ground and float up into the trees, grab some of those valuable pine nuts. But when you are in a balloon, it's very important to make sure that it's tied to the ground properly. This week, a man named Hu did not tie his balloon very well, and it started to float away. Now, his partner, who was in the balloon with him, managed to jump to safety. However, Mr. Hu was just too scared to jump. So he floated away in his big, beautiful balloon. Actually, it kind of sounds funny, but it can also be quite dangerous because there's really no way to control a balloon like that. He floated for a few days, but they were able to track him with his cell phone to see where his location was. Actually, he floated for about 300 kilometers before he finally got caught in some trees. He was cold and hungry, however, no major injuries. He said he almost gave up, and if it had not been for the rescuers, he wouldn't be alive today. Seems this kind of thing happens from time to time. A couple of guys lost control of their balloon before, ended up near the Russian border. Also, those other guys' balloon, it became untethered and ended up almost floating over North Korea. Wonder what those North Koreas would have done if a Chinese nut picker floated over their border. Probably taking his nuts. But there is one time that being stuck in a balloon is actually a good thing, and that could be during an earthquake. And China had a really big one this week. They were rocked by a 6.8 magnitude earthquake in the southwest province of Sichuan. 270 people are injured, 35 are missing, and 86 have died. Rescuers are still searching through the rubble to see if anyone else survived. There have been multiple landslides and heavy rain, which is making the rescue even more difficult. Now, this area is known for earthquakes because it is the site on the Tibetan Plateau where the tectonic plates meet. However, this earthquake was one of the largest they have had in a while. As many as 10 aftershocks have been reported, and 50,000 people have had to be relocated from the area to emergency tents that are out of the danger zone. 243 houses have completely collapsed. Nearly every house in the entire area was damaged in some way. Highways have collapsed. Power is cut. Water is out. The president has sent the army in, and 6,500 emergency workers are on the scene. It's worth noting the deadliest earthquake ever recorded in China was in the same province. Back in 2008 was a 7.9 magnitude earthquake, and that killed 90,000 people. Now, if you remember, 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the massive heat wave in China and the drought that has had led to huge water shortages there and power outages. And this all comes on top of millions of people not being allowed to leave their home in these very strict COVID lockdowns. Now, Taiwan has always seemed to be in the news lately as they are planning for their upcoming war with China. They have expressed condolences to China following the earthquake. The president's office offered the president sympathy and concern. Taiwan has said that they have assembled a rescue team to travel to China to help out, saying they are committed to the spirit of humanitarian care and disaster relief without borders. Taiwan had actually sent a team back in 2008 when the 7.9 earthquake happened. However, I have a feeling right now China is not going to be welcoming Taiwan with open arms like they did in the past. But it's okay now because China has new friends. And they have been getting very chummy lately, of course, with their new friend, who is Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, who will be hanging out with President Xi of China next week in Uzbekistan as the two countries ram up their economic cooperation. Currently, Russia is looking for any new friends it can get, considering how the West is still beating them over the head with a bat full of sanctions. The two sides have become very good friends lately as Russia has become very isolated over the Ukrainian war, and China is not on many people's friends list with all their latest threats to Taiwan. So, of course, if you're the most hated person on the playground, the best friend you can hope for is the second most hated person on the playground. The two have already said that there is no limits to their friendship, seeing as both currently share a common enemy, the good old USA. China has recently signed an agreement with Russia to settle its payments for natural gas with yuan and Russian rubles instead of US dollars. As we know, Russia is trying to force the Europeans to pay in Russian rubles to try and remove its reliance on the US financial system. This is the first time the two presidents will be talking since the war in Ukraine started, which China has still not picked a side to root for. The key question on people's minds is, how is the U.S. going to react to Xi meeting Putin before meeting with Biden? Many are predicting that at the end of this meeting, Putin and Xi will announce a new pipeline into the Chinese region. Currently, Putin's economy has been destabilized by the whole wide range of sanctions, bringing the GDP down by 4%. And At the same time, China is going through their ultra-strict zero-COVID strategy and continues its mandated lockdowns with very heavy border controls. And while the rest of the world is moving away from Russia products, China is actually increasing imports such as oil and gas and lifting the import restrictions on Russian wheat. In fact, the Chinese president said that the China-Russia trade is going to set new records in the coming months. So as the world turns its back on Russia for its war on the Ukraine, and China continues to draw criticism for its multiple threats to Taiwan, the two superpowers have been kind of forced into a date together. Seems both are in need of a good friend right now. Anyway, it seems as of now they are a perfect match for each other, but is that good for the rest of us? At least Russia now has someone they can supply oil to. And China, well, I guess they have someone now they can supply pine nuts to. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Coming back from extinction. That's an interesting topic, isn't it? When certain species go extinct and no longer roam the planet, should we try and bring them back? Of course, when we talk about this subject, we can't help but think about Jurassic Park. That they took the genetic material from a dinosaur and brought it back from extinction. Now, in the movie, that was a very bad idea. The dinosaurs didn't realize that humans were supposed to be the primary species, and so a lot of them got munched. But we didn't kill the dinosaurs. They died on their own. But what about all the animals that human caused their extinction? Should we try to fix our mistakes? And what if we didn't bring something back that could eat us? What if you stuck to something like a smaller size, like the size of a dog? For instance, what if we brought back the Tasmanian tiger? Now, what is a Tasmanian tiger? Well, first of all, it's not really a tiger. Looks more like a dog or a coyote. But it's not really that either. Now, they are a carnivorous marsupial. Marsupials being animals that have a pouch on their stomach, like a kangaroo or a koala. They have their offspring much sooner and underdeveloped than, say, a dog or a cat. The young baby, they live in the pouch until they're old enough to roam around on their own. These creatures, they got their name because they have very interesting stripes on their bodies, kind of like a tiger. And they walked the earth as far back as 2,000 years ago, but began disappearing everywhere except Australia, and mostly on the island of Tasmania. Now, why did these animals go extinct? In general, as with most things going extinct in the past several hundred years, it's humans' fault. These animals are carnivores, and so they kill other animals and eat them, such as livestock on farms. So farmers began killing them in great numbers. By the 1920s, their numbers had dwindled to almost nothing, and sometime around 1930, a farmer is believed to have shot the last one. There was only a handful left in a zoo. However, all efforts to breed them have failed, and the last Tasmanian tiger died in 1936. His name was Benjamin. But because this animal went extinct so recently, we have samples of its genetic material. So we found out this week that maybe it's possible that we could bring the extinct animal back to life. But why exactly? Why bring this creature back to life except, I don't know, maybe to show that we can? Well, a lot of this has to do with biodiversity. Because of humans changing the outcome of species through killing them, it's kind of thrown off the ecosystem. For instance, like if you killed off all the spiders, which many people don't like, then the mosquitoes would not have a predator and would multiply too much. Without a certain animal to eat the leaves of the forest, fires develop very fast. Also, without predators, certain species develop too quickly and spread disease to other animals. There are many reasons why the Earth's animals exist and where they exist. This is particular This particular animal has a specific purpose. And now that we are somewhat, I guess, smarter, we are realizing that killing off this animal and others to fix one problem has created even bigger problems. So anyway, they want to reintroduce the Tasmanian tiger back into existence and possibly fix an equality in nature that we humans created. Now the question is, how are they going to do this? Well, actually, this technology is not that new. In fact, we have talked about it before on the show. Remember in Jurassic Park when they took the blood of a dinosaur and found a fossilized mosquito and mixed it with a frog's DNA? It's the process of working now. It's pretty much the same thing. They construct a detailed genome of the extinct animal using its DNA and then take another animal which has very similar genome, which in this case would be a fat-tailed dunnart, and they will edit that animal's DNA to match the extinct one. Once they have successfully programmed a cell, they will use the dunnart as a surrogate to turn those cells into a living animal. But of course, you're saying, wait, how is a dunnart, which is the size of a mouse, going to give birth to something the size of a coyote? Remember when I explained that marsupials give birth very early before the animal has even developed? And then when these animals develop, they develop in the mother's pouch. Well, it turns out that when the Tasmanian tiger is born, it's really only the size of a grain of rice. So the actual gestation period is very short. Once the offspring is born from the dunnart, it can be cared for in a lab. This project is hopefully going to finally tie down a procedure for a very, very difficult part of taking tissues and turning them into stem cells. Then, of course, turning that into a living creature. The other interesting part of this is that no matter how successful this experiment will be, the animal they will create will not be exactly the same species. It can't be, because they have used another animal mixed in to create it. They will never be able to recreate an exact match, as there will always be some part of the genome that they cannot change from the host animal. So whatever animal comes from this experiment is going to be a hybrid of the previous animal, which brings us to another very similar experiment, which involves a project run by a Harvard geneticist to bring back a woolly mammoth. They have been working on this one for some time, and they believe that in the next 4 years, they will be able to bring back a giant fur-covered elephant that died off, mostly due to humans about 4,000 years ago. The problem here is much different because an elephant's gestation time is way longer than the animal we've been talking about. So they will first try it with an artificial womb and then birth it from a real elephant. The fascinating part of this one is, however, what part of the mammoth will they decide to keep and which parts they won't? Interesting stuff, huh? They can pick and choose how they will mimic the genetic code. For instance, they are saying that they will leave out the giant tusks on the animal so they won't be hunted by humans. Very much like in Jurassic Park, where all the dinosaurs were female, so they would not procreate. But here again, this is not a clone of a mammoth. It is and for that matter, it's not a clone of a Tasmanian tiger. It's an all new species together. Basically, we are making new species. So I guess the question is this a good idea? I mean, it's a great idea for a Netflix series, but is it interesting? The interesting thing here, I guess, is things that were once good ideas in real life, are they going to turn out like we think? Movies, and they usually leaving us with some good outcome. But how well real ideas, real human ideas in real life end? Could it be good? Maybe not so good. Should we be creating new species of animals to replace the mistakes we have made? And if these experiments are successful, what's the next step? Make a dog that doesn't poop. Make babies that don't cry. Maybe one day make humans that never die. I'll keep you updated. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ, RJTV. So let's get to some of the interesting stories from around the world. Just a quick update. Remember when Elon Musk wanted to buy Twitter for $44 billion? And the Twitter people were like, I'm not sure we want to sell. Okay, $44 billion? Sure, we'll sell it. Then just after that, stocks of everything took a dive. All of a sudden, nobody was really worth that much anymore. Then out of nowhere, okay, but not really, Elon Musk decided he didn't want to buy Twitter anymore, saying that, well, they didn't clearly say how many fake accounts there were on the platform. Something I think we all knew already. But Twitter was like, no, you promised to buy it for an outrageous price, so you have to buy it, or we will sue you for the suffering you have caused us for having to deal with you. So in court this week, a text was produced in which Musk said to one of his Morgan Stanley bankers that he wanted to exit the merger with Twitter because he believed that World War III was coming soon. Didn't make much sense to buy Twitter if World War III was coming. This is 2 months after the buyout was agreed to. Well, the Twitter guys were like, World War III or not, bid is a bid. Got to do what you said, which is pay us a ridiculous amount of money for this platform. Sometimes it's fun to brag about buying something for such a high price, but then later just back out when no one's looking. But in this case, everyone is looking. Speaking of technology, in Japan, there is a new digital minister. His name is Toro Komo. Now, Japan, as we all know, is the third largest economy in the world and is very techy. They always seem to be introducing some cool new robots or some kind of new gadget that we can't do without. Well, it turns out a lot of Japan is still running on very old technology, and this new tech-savvy minister is waging a war on that old technology. It seems that many businesses there and government offices are still using floppies. We're not talking about the anatomy of an old man, but floppy disks. Remember those things? That's what we used to use to store our kilobytes of information. Of course, no one uses that word anymore, kilobytes. I remember I used to always have one of those discs in my shirt pocket with a label, over a label, over a label. Anyway, there are about 1,900 government offices that have procedures still in place that use floppies. Now, in case you don't know, a 3.5-inch floppy can hold less than 1.4 megabytes, about 10 seconds of low-res video. Now, Toro was in a news conference saying they are reviewing how they are going to deal with this issue, saying that even though they are still using the technology, he's not even sure where you can buy a floppy disk anymore, which means they are using the same floppies they have always had. In a side story, it wasn't until 2019 the U.S. Defense Department stopped using floppies. They were originally developed in 1960 as the control system for the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Also, Toro has vowed to get rid of fax machines, as well as the red stamp, which is still being used in Japan to sign off on documents such as marriage licenses. And lastly, good old Queen Elizabeth story out of New York. The cook at one of the Four Seasons hotels, which is one of the fanciest, most exclusive hotels in the world. They have very extremely high-end restaurants. U.S. presidents, world leaders, movie stars, they have all eaten at the Four Seasons. There are several Four Seasons hotels, one of which is in Austin, Texas. The executive chef there is Elmar Prams, who has had to prepare meals for famous people. In these high-end types of restaurants, you will sometimes have to create a meal for a famous person, and that meal can many times define your career. If the VIP likes your meal, mostly you're going to go very far. Well, Elmar got his chance back in 1991. Not just some famous person coming to the hotel. It was the Queen of England. She and her husband were on tour then, were visiting the museums, among other things there. The chef remembers the nervousness he went through, knowing that the Queen would be eating at his restaurant. So everything had to be perfect and ready. He said this was the highlight of his career. When she finally arrived at the restaurant and was seated, she made her order, and it was a ham sandwich with the crust removed. Also, she brought her own bread, which she gave to the kitchen, and her own tea. They meticulously prepared her ham sandwich and her tea. The famous chef recalled, "Yep, that's what she wanted. That was the highlight of my career. A ham sandwich for the Queen." Another side story, in Canada, their ruler or president is actually the Queen of England. And on Thursday, they were doing a Canadian citizenship ceremony when word came that the Queen had died. Well, they had not gotten to the part where you express your allegiance to the Queen. So they had to stop the ceremony and figure out what to say. The 141 would-be citizens had to wait as officials had to talk to each one of them individually. Canada takes its citizenship very seriously and carefully, and they realized you can't swear to someone who has died. So the presiding judge had carefully reworded the oath taking. The new citizens had to say, "Our allegiance is to His Majesty, King Charles III, King of Canada." They will go down in history as the first to take the citizenship under the new king. The ceremony ended with the statement, "The Queen is dead. Long live the new king." This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Please join us again next week right here on RJTV and DZRJ. For now, everybody be safe out there. We'll see you next week.